On October 7th, 2023, Dov Maisel had to make the hardest decision of his life. Not only was it Simchat Torah, the most joyful holiday of the year, but it was also the day of his son's Bar-Mitzvah, a momentous occasion for any 13-year-old Jewish boy. As Dov and his family were running from the Bar-Mitzvah ceremony to bomb shelters as rockets began to rain down from Hamas, his phone rang. As the VP of Operations for United Hatzalah, one of the largest emergency response organizations in Israel, Dov knew he would have a difficult decision to make. In fact, it would be the hardest decision he had ever made in his life: to send first responders he was responsible for directly into the line of fire along the Gaza border. Their mission? To save lives, no matter who they were. This raw and emotional story from October 7th is one that will leave you sitting on the edge of your seat. Here's Dov Maisel, Director of Operations for United Hatzalah, with the story.
So I'm Dov Maisel, Vice President of Operations for United Hatzalah. I'm one of the founders of the organization 18 years ago. I officially coordinate all the different operations of the organization: operations division, medical division, IT, motor vehicles, everything that our volunteers use as resources out there and are activated with, communications and all of that as well. But what is United Hatzalah? So United Hatzalah is, first of all, Hatzalah, for those who aren't familiar, is the Hebrew word for rescue. So we're United Rescue of Israel, and what we're uniting is the cross-section of Israeli society, because United Hatzalah is a community-based emergency response organization. It's community, it's power of community, it's volunteers, men, women, Jews, Arabs, Orthodox, secular, Israeli society, basically, all taking part in a mission that is saving lives in the community, responding to every call within 90 seconds, understanding that it's not ambulances that save lives, it's people. Because an ambulance can be stuck in traffic for 10 or 15 minutes, but the help can be your neighbor right across the street. Get the call on the Uber system app, jump out of the house, get the equipment, run across the street, connect the defibrillator, help that choking kid, or give an EpiPen shot if it's an allergic reaction. Goal of 90 seconds, over 7,000 volunteers throughout Israel, responding to over 2,000 emergencies every single day. I think we're most known for our ambu cycles, which revolutionized the response time in the congested big cities. There's over 1,000 ambu cycles. It's a motorcycle, fully decked with all the life-saving equipment that's in an ambulance, except for the stretcher, and they can zip through traffic, jump on sidewalks, and get to that call within 90 seconds, and essentially save that person's life. And that's the core of what we're doing, is saving lives every single day to over 2,000 emergencies, all volunteers, like I said, uniting the cross-section of Israeli society in a life-saving mission, which is uncontroversial, and saving thousands and thousands of people every single day.
So I want to talk about October 7th, the most horrific tragedy that befall the Jewish people in over 70 years since the Holocaust. Tell us what happened from your perspective. What happened on that day? What was United Hatzalah's response? What did you see?
So, first of all, from a personal perspective, October 7th was supposed to be a very, very special day for me and my family, which you can see on the picture here on the wall. It was supposed to be the Bar-Mitzvah of my youngest son on October 7th. All excited with the whole family, gathered by my parents in Efrat, just south of Jerusalem, and getting ready for, to go to the services early in the morning there and celebrate the Bar-Mitzvah. And at 6:29, the world changed. Basically, wow, I'm getting the goosebumps just when we remember everything that happened there. 6:29, the radio starts going off nonstop of air raid sirens throughout the south, central Israel, Rehovot, direct hits in Rehovot, direct hits in Ashkelon. And so immediately I get on the phone with my deputy and I tell my wife, it'll be okay, we're used to this.
Right.
Rockets
are normal in some sense.
I tell, don't worry. 15, 20 minutes, small rocket barrage. We'll be back to normal in a half hour. We'll be at shul, we'll be at services. Don't worry, everything is as normal. And as minutes are going by, and I call my deputy, I get my whole staff immediately on deck, those coming in to headquarters, those heading out to the field, and trying to create some sort of an assessment of the initial situation. more and more air raid sirens, and we're starting to understand. It starts feeling in the gut. This is more. This is not your typical, a few rockets on Sderot or Ashkelon. But we didn't know to put the finger on it yet. And as calls were coming in, we started getting calls. I think this was already around 6:45. Started getting calls of gunshots in certain areas, in Sderot, and in some of the Yishuvim in the area, and the villages, and we're trying to create some sort of a picture of what's going on, but it didn't really register until 6:59. 6:59, my deputy is already here downstairs in dispatch. I've got an open hotline with him in one ear and the radio in the other, basically. And at 6:59, we get a call of a massive car pile up in one of the southern roads on Route 232, and I'm like, wait a second. Saturday morning, 6:59 in the morning, there is no way in the world there's an accident that big.
Right.
This is definitely, and I tell him, David, this is not an accident. And then a minute later, literally, we're on the line, dispatch starts getting phone calls of gunshots there and active shooting. And we understand, okay, this is an incident on a different scale. And we started deploying our volunteers. So, like I said, first of all, going back to the explanation of how the method of operation of the organization is community-based. So we have in every single one of the towns down south, in Sderot, in Netivot, in Ofakim, in Be'eri, in Saad, and all of the kibbutzim, we have volunteers that live there. And now they're calling in. They themselves are calling in and saying that they're hearing gunshots. So while they're locking their family members in the shelters, they're going out to respond, not knowing what they're going into. And we don't even have yet, a full picture of what's going on. Nobody does. We try to call the police, no answer. Try to get information from here, from there. Basically, we're gathering information from people who are calling our emergency hotline, our 1221 emergency hotline, and our volunteers themselves. And I think it was around 7:10, something like that. Some of our volunteers in Sderot and in Ofakim are calling in and saying that their cars are being shot at. They didn't even identify the terrorists yet, but they identified gunshots and they heard shots on their own car. Afterwards, we got the pictures. We saw they literally bullet holes throughout their cars, miraculously not hitting them at this point. But we understood, okay. And then on social media, on Telegram groups, already started circulating the first videos of the Hamas nukhbas on the Toyotas going through Sderot, and I'm looking at it, I'm saying, it doesn't even seem fathomable that you have terrorists on the back of Toyotas driving through Sderot. It just doesn't make sense. But at the same time, we're getting live phone calls where you can hear the gunshots.
Yeah.
And the shouting on the street. And a few minutes after that, one of our volunteers, Rabbi Chaim Sassi from Sderot, he drives one of our ambucycles. He left his house, his family locked in the shelter, and he went out to respond to casualties that were reported near the police station. And he comes around one of the last roundabout before the police station, and he sees a terrorist coming at him on an ATV, shooting towards him. So he's also on the security team there in Sderot, but he went out as a responder, but he carries a gun, and he pulls out his gun and shoots the terrorist down. Gets on the radio and says, the terrorist has been taken out, the incident is over. Not even understanding the big picture. 2 seconds later, he gets shot 3 times. He gets shot in the face, in the arm, and the leg. He's on the ground. He drags himself behind a metal recycle bin, while the sniper is still trying to take additional shots at him. And he reports that he's been hit. He starts bandaging himself up. Nobody can get close to him because there's a sniper on the roof across from the police station. And Now we understand, okay, we have a few volunteers already simultaneously reporting that they're being shot at. And we understand, okay, so first of all, we relay over the information to everyone to be super cautious, protective gear, bulletproof vests and helmets and whatnot, and not to rush into the scenes without looking around, because clearly it's understood by the reports that we're getting from multiple sites already of terrorists on the ground. We had no idea. Just, I think it was last week they released a report of how many people actually entered from Gaza.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
You saw that? 6,000, over 6,000, 3,000 of them plus were Nukhba terrorists, and another 3,000 just guys coming in for the great time on the way. We didn't even imagine those were the numbers.
Right.
But we did know that we had dozens of them in multiple scenes. I mean, when we started creating an assessment of a mapping out of the whole area, I ended up pulling in a whiteboard when I was down here. That was later in the morning a little bit, and I'll get to how I got here and whatever, but we started creating like a literal map, because dispatch is getting the calls and sending responders and volunteers, and people are going out and risking their lives and everything. And we're creating a map, and wait a second, this is massive. This is over 60 kilometers.
Right.
This is huge. We're talking about 25 towns, cities, kibbutzim. This is a scale that nobody ever prepared for. I mean, we do training throughout the year, every year, mass casualty incidents. Unfortunately, in my 35 years in EMS, I've responded myself to hundreds of terror attacks. I myself, back in the beginning of 2000, responded to over 50 suicide bombers here in Jerusalem myself, including one that my own uncle was killed in and I triaged. And nothing prepared us for something on this scale. And ultimately, our organization as an organization is, a first response organization. It's a buffer from the community. We're there to bridge the gap until the government ambulance services, the national ambulance services kick in. We bridge that gap, we perform the CPR, we stop the bleed and whatnot, and then a few minutes later, an ambulance will show up. Except here, that didn't happen.
Right.
Everyone was on their own. And you've got dozens and dozens of people injured. Dispatch is instructing people through the app that, when you call here, they send you a link and we can immediately have video, and they're instructing people how to improvise tourniquets. Right. and in their homes on the street. And we understand that this is huge. So obviously we understand that it's not enough to only rely on our responders from Sderot, from Netivot, from Ofri. We're going to need to send additional backup, and we immediately start mobilizing a national.
At what point was this? Like, what time in the day did you really begin to understand this is a serious situation?
So we understood this is a serious situation just post 7 o'clock, and within between 7 and 8, it really started creating a broader, more detailed heat map of what was going on. And at this point, I'm like, okay. Back to my own personal story, is like, what do I do with a Bar-Mitzvah?
Right.
My wife is looking at me. My kid has been learning for half a year how to read the portion.
And too, just for people to understand, like looking back, people would say, obviously, well, it's a massive situation, but in Israel, rockets are shot all the time.
Exactly.
There's sirens all the time. Like when you see something like this, an automatic reaction in Israel is not, major emergency, right?
Exactly. But one thing and another thing and another thing, and it's here and it's there and it's all over, and I'm like, whoa, this is okay.
Right.
We need to. So we start mobilizing a response mechanism of additional backup units and ambulances from Jerusalem and Modi'in and Tel Aviv and Beersheba and all these areas. We start deploying them to the area. I also give an order on the phone already to go and open up our logistical center on that morning, and send our trucks over to start packing up equipment to send down south, but also actually to send up north.
Really?
Because looking at our threats that we're dealing with here and our emergency preparedness, they're always linked to each other. I mean, we can see this for the past 11 months.
Right.
You have 100,000+ people that are evicted from their homes up north. Mm-hmm. And we get rocket barrages every day from Hezbollah, and so it's always linked to each other. And we didn't know. We also thought if there was a terror infiltration from down south, This is one of the terror threats that we've been training for up north and preparing for the past decade. It's not, I'm sure everybody's heard the different theories of the multiple fronts and the simultaneous attack, which didn't happen, thankfully.
Thank God, yeah.
Thank God it didn't happen, because we would have been in a much worse situation. But we prepared. So our automatic deployment was also to the north to prepare for there as well. Sending down south truckloads of equipment, personal protective gear, medical supplies throughout the day. But this started already early in the morning. And if to loop back, just to wrap up my own personal angle of this was, I look at my wife and I say, okay, there were air raid sirens in Efrat as well where I was. So they cleared out all of the synagogues were emptied out. All the shuls were emptied out. And most of the people actually started deploying to their army units, because this is a very Zionistic community. And I look at my wife and I say, okay, this is what we're going to do. I grab my brother-in-law, run out of the house, run down the block, 200 stairs down, into the shul, into the synagogue, open the Aron Kodesh, take out the Torah, run back up to the house, walk into the living room, tell my sister-in-law, get your neighbors, so we have a minion of 10 men, open it up on the dining room table, and I tell my son, you're reading it now. And I have my earpiece in one ear and the radio going off on the other, and I say, Ro'i, you are reading this now. My wife, my mom, my sister-in-laws, my sister and sister-in-law, they're all there in the kitchen. They're overlooking. This is like a war scene. And he starts reading his portion, and a minute in, an air raid siren. We all run, some to the shelter, some to the stairwell, come back. He reads the second part, whatever. He reads the 5 parts that he learned of the portion.
Right.
He finishes that, and I say goodbye. Wow. I left the house, and the next time I came back was 4 days later. Just, you continue, do your prayers, do whatever you want. I got to get to headquarters, jump into the car, lights and sirens, and rush down here to the EOC that we opened up right here in the auditorium. We opened up an emergency operations center. The whiteboard that I was talking about, creating the map, understanding the needs, pushing the supplies down south, mobilizing ambulances from central Israel and mobile intensive care units to head down there, because we understand that whatever is down there, whether our resources, our volunteers, or the government services, it's simply not enough.
Right.
Because there's simply more and more calls pouring in about victims here, and people on the highway route here, and there's bodies everywhere. And I get here and I run into dispatch, and I'm telling them, okay, prepare the tables and computers and everything in the EOC. I want to get a rapid assessment of what's going on. My deputy's there. My whole team is here. And I'm looking at the screen and our ambulances, which, by the way, is a funny story about the ambulances. Funny, I don't know if you can say funny about it, but we had 11 brand new ambulances. Literally brand new. They weren't even inaugurated yet. Now, during the high holidays here, the donors come to Israel, for the high holidays. So we make the dedication ceremonies. And then we deploy the ambulances out. So they were all brand new in their bags, literally. Lined up and prepared for the ceremonies, which were supposed to be the next day. I give an order to my head of operations. I tell him, take all of the new ambulances and get them down there right away. And he's like, are you kidding? We didn't do the ceremonies. This is the Yom Kippur War all over again.
Yeah. Wow. Israel's been at war for 1 year now, which has taken a big toll on their economy. Businesses are struggling and prices are rising. Thankfully, there's a way for people like you around the world to step in and provide strength where it's critically needed. With Blessed by Israel, you have the opportunity to step up and invest in small businesses and families in Israel by purchasing their wonderful products. When you shop at blessedbyisrael.com, you're getting more than awesome olive oil, tea, honey, flour, cosmetics, jewelry, and a lot of really other great products. You're sending vital reinforcement to keep Israel strong. So head over to blessedbyisrael.com, that's blessedbyisrael.com, enjoy the wonderful products, and make your crucial investment in the families and small businesses of Israel. Use code INVEST for $5 off your first order. Just head over to blessedbyisrael.com or click the link in the description below. Now, back to the episode.
So he deploys them. By the way, coming in to here in the car, I'm driving down Begin, which is the highway that cuts through Jerusalem. And it's, holiday morning, Simchat Torah. I observe Shabbat. I'm driving the car. I look to my right and to my left. And I see in all of the cars, everybody's wearing yarmulkes.
Yeah.
That is like the most surreal thing. My radio is going nuts of additional reports of shooting here, infiltration of terrorists to Zikim, to Yad Mordechai, to Kfar Aza, to Be'eri. Oh my God, look at the goosebumps here, crazy. And I'm thinking to myself, these are the stories that I was raised on by my parents. My parents made Aliyah as teenagers from the States and were here before the Yom Kippur War. They met here in Israel.
Right.
And these are the stories that I was raised on. And I'm saying to myself, 50 years later, this is exactly Yom Kippur War again. And I say, whatever resources we have, we're sending down there. Whatever volunteers are willing to go down there, we're going to send down there. And so throughout this process, our ambulances that are down there are transporting, victims from Sderot and from Ofakim. In Ofakim, our chief paramedic lives in Ofakim, in the neighborhood Shchonat HaGiffen, which is the neighborhood that was severely struck there. 50 people were killed in that neighborhood, slaughtered in their homes. And he lives there. And he heard the gunshots there at 7 o'clock in the morning. And by the way, there, the shooting started about a half hour later because of the sheer distance of Ofakim from Gaza. Ofakim is one of the most distant populated areas that were hit by the terrorists. And he heard the gunshots and he left his home. And he literally he was seeing the terrorists. He was hiding from the terrorists, and him with other volunteers and policemen were trying to make their way through the neighborhood. And they were putting tourniquets here and tourniquets there. And it's like TCCC, for those who aren't in the emergency medical field, is tactical casualty combat care. And these are when you learn in this profession, this is for military.
Right.
And we're finding ourselves in the midst of a military situation in a vast civilian area. So you're talking about hundreds of victims under fire being treated by volunteers that are risking their lives.
Was that a decision at some point that you had to make? Because I mean, from what I understand, in the emergency response world, like the majority of the time,
safety first.
You wait till the scene is safe, right? And then you go in.
The ground rule is safety first.
But in this situation,
exactly. So the initial response, like I said, was by the volunteers themselves in their own neighborhoods. They found themselves in the incident. It wasn't that they were entering the incident. Where did this decision kick in? And I look back at it, is the hardest decision of my life, by far. So those who are there, and this is surrounding them, and it's in their neighborhoods, it's only a natural response. They're saving their own neighbors.
right?
And I don't think that as a human being you can stand aside and say, no, the scene is not secure, when you see your neighbor or your family member bleeding to death.
Right.
But us sending hundreds of additional volunteers that left their homes into harm's way knowingly was by far the hardest decision I ever made in my whole life. And I made it here. I recall I had my head of the medical division and my deputy and the head of emergency unit advocate, being my devil's advocate, saying no, safety first and this and that. And I'm like, at a certain point I just go, what are you all talking about? Is there any other response there? Is anybody there? Soldiers are busy fighting terrorists. They're fighting the enemy. There is nobody there. These people are gonna die. I'm not gonna force anyone. But I'm willing to take full responsibility on record that I'm allowing people to go and make sure they're protected, bulletproof vests and helmets, preferably if they're armed, not going alone, but in teams of two at least, basic precautions, but knowingly, yes, going in under fire. And we made the order, and external resources, additional backup units that the volunteers that came started going in. And I even I didn't remember this, but in retrospective, my head of the medical division, Elad, came to me and said, Dovi, you probably don't even remember this within the balagan, but you told everybody there that I know that we're going to need to go after this and pay shiva calls, condolences to the partners, to the wives, and to the husbands of and I named people there. I'm not going to say the names over now, but I know we're going to need to go to and tell her what a hero her husband was. I didn't remember it when he said that. And thank God. I'm saying there's no other way to explain this except that angels came down from heaven on that day and protected hundreds of volunteers that went head on, looking in the white of the eyes of terrorists there, treating people, and bullets stopping in the gun that wouldn't shoot anymore, and other miracles like this, because these people went in to save other people. And when I say other people, I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds. We have over 300 evacuations documented on our ambulances, all from the fire zones. In Kfar Aza, in Be'eri, in Ofakim, in Sderot, in Netivot, in everywhere. And unfortunately, in the first wave, 2 of our volunteers were killed. One in the Nova Festival, an Arab volunteer from Nazareth, who was there as part of his job on medical standby, but he didn't flee.
Oh, at the festival.
The festival. And he stayed there for 2.5 hours, treating people that were injured until they killed him. And another volunteer from Kiryat Malachi that left his home and was killed and then head on immediately early in the attack. We had some volunteers that were kidnapped. One of them is still held in captivity, Bar Kupelstein. And another one was retrieved 2 months ago and brought to burial. This was just morning, and it just went on and on and on.
You said you were basically from the time you left home to the time you came back to your house was a 4-day period. Was that just nonstop, day and night?
Yeah. So essentially, October 7th was October 7th, 8th. Right. Because they only liberated, can't even believe that we're talking about liberating kibbutz, right, Be'eri and Kfar Aza only by Sunday evening. It took until Sunday evening to re-liberate these kibbutzim. Right. And in the days to follow, the whole area was still considered an army closed-off area because there were still terrorists in the fields and in other places and hiding out. And the volunteers that live down south were evacuated their homes. So we had our teams go down south throughout these days and man shifts of ambulances and response vehicles throughout, not even only for the war-related incidents, but you have thousands of people that still live there and aren't evicted, right, and need medical attention.
Just
to heart
be on
attacks
call,
and and that's what they were doing.
Because nobody could get in.
Nobody could get in, exactly.
Or out, I guess.
It's so hard to describe. I mean, there's so many stories, heroic stories. There's the famous story of, this was already in the night hours of Sunday night. I think this was around near midnight. And Saturday night. I lost my days.
Yeah.
October 7th.
Together,
Between October 7th and 8th, around midnight, 2 little babies were rescued out of Kfar Aza. They were found while actually the story goes back to early in the morning. It went on. At 9:00 in the morning on October 7th, Kfar Aza, you don't have a map here, but Kfar Aza is across the intersection from Kibbutz Saad.
Yeah.
Kibbutz Saad. Kibbutz Saad, on the morning of October 7th, was not infiltrated by terrorists, But the back gate of Kibbutz Saad, which is the intersection from the entrance to Kfar Aza, essentially, is on Route 232. And Route 232 was the famous route of the videos that everybody saw of the cars burnt everywhere, the apocalyptic views of cars burning everywhere. And what happened was our volunteers from Saad immediately went to the back gate there and opened up the gate, because those fleeing from Nova Festival and heading north to escape all were getting on Route 232, except past Kfar Aza, the route was swarming with terrorists. So what they had done, essentially, our volunteers there, together with the Kitat Konenut, the emergency team of Saad, they made a physical blockage of vehicles on Route 232 so people won't be able to go north. And they opened up the gate to the kibbutz so everybody would go in, and they opened up a triage area there because they were receiving dozens of people who were shot in the Nova Festival, and they started treating them over there. And then trying to get them out from the other side of the kibbutz. Now at 9 a.m., one of our volunteers there from Saad, nobody got into Kfar Aza early in the morning.
Right.
And at 9 or 9:15 a.m., the first army vehicles showed up there, and he jumped on with them and went into Kfar Aza, not even knowing what was going on in there. And he went in and he started doing, going through the first houses there, treating here, treating there, and he got to one of the houses there, and he went to the window of the mamad, of the shelter, knocked, identified himself. They opened. He jumped in. There was a family there that was hiding. The father of the family, that they all had to hold the doors closed because they had no locks, right? So he was holding it very, very tight, and the terrorists came from the other side and put an IED there, a bomb on the door, trying to break into the shelter, except it molded the door to the wall.
Wow.
But in the explosion, the guy lost both his hands from inside. So our volunteer jumped in, put on tourniquets, and then the terrorists came back. So he ended up getting stuck there for 6 hours with them, treating him while they were surrounded with terrorists. Later in the day, we all know the famous battle of what happened in Kfar Aza, but near midnight, we had a triage team, which we coordinated with the Army ad hoc on the ground, because there wasn't any central management. It was all about ad hoc connections on the ground. We found commander of 669 unit there, team up with him. Okay, we are landing the helicopters, we'll bring the victims. And we created like a shuttle of ambulances going from Be'eri, from Kfar Aza, bringing out all the victims, whether they're civilian or soldiers that were going in to battle and coming out injured, putting them in, triaging them there, putting them in the ambulances and bringing them out towards the landing pad where we had our helicopters and the Army had their helicopters and our staging and triage area. And around midnight, they bring out with one of the, the Army vehicles, pulls out two babies. Two babies, literally two babies. And they hand them over to our volunteers by the yellow gate of our staging area in the entrance to Kfar Aza, asking some questions. Where are the parents? Where are this? Parents were murdered. Parents were murdered. Two babies were left. They didn't kill the babies. The story was, from what we heard from the Army, I don't know, I didn't hear it firsthand, but I didn't see it. But this is what the Army told us there, is that they left the babies there, not killing them, but they stayed in the house. So people would hear the babies crying and using them as bait. You hear babies crying, you come to the house.
Right.
They shoot until the terrorists were taken out eventually. And then they rescued the babies, handed over to our volunteers, to, less than a year old. Babies.
These are twins, or?
I think they were twins. They're very
Right.
unbelievable. Rescued from there, brought out, taken to the hospital, and later, the family is raising them or whatever. But and I mean, there were endless stories there. Endless stories of lives being saved. The commander, there was a elite fighter there that was severely shot and hit, and he was unconscious, and they were ventilating him with Kfar Aza or Be'eri, I can't even remember anymore. Our volunteers, our paramedics, put him on our mobile intensive care unit, intubated him, transported him out, put him on our helicopter, took him to the hospital. That guy was just appointed 2 months ago as the head of the Tzabar battalion of Givati.
Wow.
Saved his life, and he's back in combat down in Gaza as a battalion commander. I mean, lives, we have documented over 600 or 700 people that we transported in ambulances, private cars, you name it. I'm not talking about all those that aren't documented, because they simply were, they threw on tourniquets, and regular civilians, they just threw them into their cars, put in tourniquets, arm, legs, in the car, drive to the hospital. Just get out of here, go. Hundreds. Well over 1,000 people.
Wow. I'm sure we could spend a couple hours listening to stories. What would be your message to the world as we come up on this 1-year commemoration?
I don't know when you're publicizing this, but it's September 10th when we're taping this. And I just finished writing a post that I just posted now, because tomorrow is 9/11. And I wrote in the post how even back then, 23 years ago, 23 years ago, when the most horrific terror attack hit America, and when you think about it, this on scale is about 35 times worse.
Right.
I wrote that we stand united, sharing values. And no matter what other people try, once it used to be very simple. Bad was bad and good was good. For some reason, people try to paint bad as good. We share values that are life. We share values that are freedom. We share values of family. We share all these important values. And I think that what we do in United Hatzalah is an example of many organizations which are fantastic, because they all share one goal, which we all share in our values, and that's doing good. And I think it was the Lubavitch Rebbe that once said, darkness, you can fight with swords and guns and whatever you want, it won't make the dark go away. Right. Light a little match, a little candle, and a lot of the darkness goes away. We gotta emphasize on doing good as a people in general. As people who see the good, we gotta do more good and emphasize on the doing good together, and try to show the world that this is what we need to be focused on, not trying to explain why bad is good. Let's just focus on doing good, and that will make us all better.
We have passed the 1-year commemoration of October 7th, and there are 2 things that you can do. Number 1, always remember, never forget. And number 2, make sure it never happens again. That means take action. There's one small action that you can take today, and that is purchasing beautiful and amazing products from small family-owned businesses in Israel's heartland at blessedbyisrael.com, or click the link down in the description below. Make sure you subscribe. Let us know in the comment section what you thought of today's story. And as always, tune out the fake news and propaganda and tune into what is actually happening here in Israel. As always, we'll be back soon here at the Israel Guys.